I was telling you something that I hear a lot, which is that a lot of teachers get their curriculum or at least their lesson plans and lesson ideas from Pinterest. And if not Pinterest, another website where they pay each other, but there's no quality control. Like there's teachers exchanging, oh, this is what I use, or this is what I use. And by the way, pay me a little bit for it. And then, you pull it down and your principal looks at it and goes, what is that? Where did you get that from? And, well, I bought it off online from other teachers, from other educators. Well, first of all, let me just stop there. In your experience, is that true that you have teachers shooting for the wrong places, to get their curriculum?
Yeah. And definitely. It is Freedom Friday and you are still not free.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Freedom Friday. This is Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Ish and me. I am Citizen Stewart, and we have Ish Jimenez from Philly, an educator, the resident educator on this particular show, who keeps us honest about our conversations when we're talking about schools and stuff. Ish, how you doing, brother?
Doing well, brother. Happy Friday.
It is Friday and we are still not free, but man, Saturday we are free. So, for sure this week I am going to be free on a weekend. Like many people, I do this thing where I keep working all the time, and I take pride in how much I work. I work, I work every day. I take no days off. Man, listen, that's a recipe for dying. I'm gonna stop doing that. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about curriculum and high quality curriculum, the power of curriculum. And the reason that I want to talk about it is that every week we are generally talking about education, how you educate children, how our children are not getting the education that they deserve, and what could be better. The interesting thing is with the public who don't who aren't in schools every day. The public who are not teachers and educators and principals or whatever, they don't have the experience with the system every day to know that there are some hidden things that are very important to student learning. There's some things that you would never think about, right? Curriculum is one of those things. Like we don't think about, where does the curriculum come from? How do teachers get it? How do they know that it's good? How do they know that it's high quality? What do you do when it doesn't work? And what do we mean by doesn't work? These are all questions that if you really do care about whether or not your kid's getting an education, this is one of those black belt parent type of things. Like, you worried about Maslow's stuff, right? And I'm sure this is kind of high up on Maslow's. This isn't food or shelter or water or any of that stuff. It's so important though. Like where your teachers are getting their curriculum is very important. And Ish, you have, you have experience as an educator, but specifically as a social studies educator. So we should talk about this with the frame of social studies. Maybe in a future show we could talk to somebody who has history as their main thing, or reading or science or whatever. But let's start today with social studies because we live in a social world and it's so important. First of all, why don't we just start with what's bad curriculum? What would be considered, let's get that out of the way. Just what's in circulation right now that isn't good for us in terms of curriculum.
Well, I would say bad curriculum is no curriculum, right? Providing no guidance, having no type of basically teachers that's getting up there and spouting from their worldview about what they think about the world. Which happens a lot in social studies and in history, unfortunately. If you want to see the most problematic department in the high school, you want to go to check out the social studies department, because in there you'll get the most vile, tainted views. And if you have no real guidance and no real curriculum, that is actually the worst. And folks actually even derive what ideas they're going to do from that worldview, which, becomes a downward spiral. I would say other curriculums like the cookie cutter curriculums, where they're like manufactured, like assembly line type style, with no real type of training around it, and teachers are unfamiliar with it.
That and also where's that coming from? Where does that come from? Is that like from Scholastic or some corporation? Where does that come from?
Well, without naming specific
Okay,
corporations,
yeah, all right. I think we should name names, but all right.
yeah. Well, I have
Yeah, yeah,
feelings
yeah,
about
yeah.
certain things. I think people confuse curriculum with textbooks. So, like, they think the textbook is the curriculum, and that is all that it is. So, like, as a result, you have folks who just straight up teach from the textbook, rely on that for the class, and they don't recognize that a real curriculum uses the textbook as one of many sources to actually teach a more comprehensive and holistic type curriculum for the course, whatever course or content that you're talking about. The issue then becomes when we have these, big textbook manufacturers, Pearson, HHM, all these other folks trying to sell large bulk things to the school districts and be like, this textbook and back in the day, I'm going to date myself a little bit, this CD-ROM with these tests that are related to the readings within the textbook, which are like watered down kind of perspectives that usually come and are usually one sided, especially when we're talking about history and social studies. Um, and as a result of that, those curriculums, which I wouldn't call curriculums, but a lot of people confuse and conflate, those are the worst. Especially if you don't have an administrator or an administration in your school district that approaches education and curriculum in a much more comprehensive and like with a different lens that recognizes, oh, well, we just can't spend millions of dollars on these textbooks. There's other aspects of the curriculum, such as professional development, such as ultimately other sources that teachers should have access to in order to, give to students so they can learn from multiple perspectives.
Walk me through what you have seen. If I were to come to Philly and I was going to be starting a teacher and I was going to be starting next week, what's my task list about how I'm going to start teaching next week? Walk us through the new teacher steps, like before you come into the classroom. What are you preparing for, and how are you getting your information?
I mean, that's a brilliant question because we actually have new hire orientation several times throughout the year for teachers are coming in, and I actually facilitate that for the middle school to the high school itself. And I would say that the thing that we focus on is teachers being able to have the tools necessary to even manage a class, right? And I hate the word manage, but like to get to the simple idea, like how are you approaching the students? How are you even talking to the students about what content you're going to be talking with them? And then we want to give them the tools. So the way we have developed our curriculum is actually textbook independent. And then we want to give teachers several access points, what I call training wheels, to kind of like grasp what should I be doing? So even if the teacher's new and inexperienced and never taught in the classroom before, right? They will walk in the classroom, have the tools necessary and the ideas to start an effective classroom management strategy, but then also include texts that they can use with the students, also protocols that they can have the material and the resources used effectively with the students. And then that also feeds back into student engagement. And then it also feeds into kind of a comprehensive way of approaching curricular resources. And that's what I would emphasize. And I know, hopefully, I'm not using words that are but I feel like I am. Um, but
No,
like,
I mean, I'll pull it back because,
yeah,
like I'm a layperson. So, all these questions I'm asking honestly as like a layperson, you know, um, if you're going to start next week, how do you organize what you're going to teach?
yeah.
Where do you get that information from? Before we started today, I was telling you something that I hear a lot, which is that a lot of teachers get their curriculum or at least their lesson plans and lesson ideas from Pinterest. And if not Pinterest, another website where they pay each other, but there's no quality control. Like there's teachers exchanging, oh, this is what I use, or this is what I use. And by the way, pay me a little bit for it. And then, you pull it down and your principal looks at it and goes, what is that? Where did you get that from? And, well, I bought it off online from other teachers, from other educators. Well, first of all, let me just stop there. Is it, in your experience, is that true that you have teachers shooting shooting for the wrong places, to get their curriculum?
Yeah. And definitely, I can speak on it as, someone who works with teachers, but then I can also speak to it as a parent. So one of my sons in first grade attending school, the teacher for Black History Month pulled something from teacher paid teachers. And in this was a little like booklet about Black History Month. And then you go through the booklet. I learned that this is the first time I learned Gerald Ford was the one that changed it from a week to a month officially, right, for the country, something I never knew before. But then nothing about Carter G. Woodson. It was a very whitewashed, soul kind of like excluded explanation of what the purpose of Black History Month is. And if you flip through it, you would think Martin Luther King created it. And that like this is just part of this like racial mythology of progress that this country likes to perpetuate. And so when I said something to the teacher supposedly thought I was calling them racist. And the thing in the email, I straight up said to the teacher, like, I don't know, where you got this resource from. Later, I did learn it was teacher paid teachers. I was like, but this resource is inappropriate. Carter G. Woodson's not mentioned. I know a bunch of anti-racist groups within the city that I can point you to because I know you have a classroom full of Black children, and it would be beneficial for you to learn different strategies and different and gain access to different resources to teach Black History Month more effectively. Supposedly the teacher cried, still hates me, I heard. And the principal afterwards told me, like, don't talk to my teachers, talk to me and I'll talk to my teachers. So that was really, as a parent, my first thing, because as an educator, I would never go to teacher paid teachers because I know that, like, what can they provide that I don't already have access to or can't gain access to myself and vet myself. A lot of folks wait till the last moment, pull from these websites, and then use it in the class without fully even understanding what they're using. And another example of this recently was, in Philadelphia, we have a required African American history course. Well, supposedly this teacher from Pinterest got this idea that you would have your students write a letter to their slave master begging for their family members not to be sold, and like what arguments you would make for that. The most ridiculous nonsense in the world. But this is what's happening when we don't have a comprehensive curriculum. This is what's happening when folks are just going online and then searching with their lack of knowledge about how to truly approach these subjects, and quite frankly, doing more harm than good when it comes to actually providing students with what they need to know in order to navigate this society.
When you think about that interaction that you had as a parent, you're also an educator. Um, if you weren't an educator, do you think you would still be having that same conversation with the teacher? And do you think parents should themselves be putting this on their task list of things to pay attention to? I mean, we already have a lot of things to pay attention to. I'll just be very honest with you. But this is one more. Should we be like, when your kids come home, let me see what are asking the teacher, what's your syllabus or what? I don't even know what that conversation is supposed to be. So help me as a parent who's not in the classroom as a trained educator. What would I be looking for? And what would that conversation look like? And when would I be bringing it up? At the beginning of the year or when? Like, help us out as parents.
Well, yeah. Back to school night is so important at the beginning of the school year. That's where you can actually step into your students' classroom or classrooms if they go to multiple teachers and actually see the layout of the classroom, right? So pay attention to what's up on the wall, what type of groups are represented, what is emphasized, like what's the invisible curriculum as soon as you enter in the classroom. So if you enter in the classroom and you feel a chill, you know that your child is going to feel that chill too, and that ain't good, right? So being able to fill that out, that's step one. Step two, I would say ask those teachers specifically if they have a syllabus or what curriculum they are using. Because a lot of the times, if they're unable to articulate specifically about what they're talking about or what they're going to do, usually they don't know what they're doing, and they're more likely to pull from these websites. When it comes to different heritage months or different holidays, right? If you don't have time to look at every single thing that goes through your child's hand or is assigned for homework, pay attention to the Thanksgiving worksheet that they got to do for homework. Ask them about those questions at Thanksgiving if you don't have time besides that day to actually sit down and be like, okay, so what did you learn about the beginning of Thanksgiving this year, right? What did your teacher talk about Columbus or Indigenous Peoples Day? What did they emphasize? You know what I mean? Those type of things allow you to see those quick points of like subjects and content, which is considered sensitive in some quarters in this society, but really ultimately reflect kind of the unreconciled type of conversation that our society has around race and history and mythology and everything like that. And that will allow you to gauge how problematic the stuff put in front of your child actually is, or how much is being put in front of your child, because even the lack of what is shown to your child is a form of curriculum also. And when you know what's not being covered, if your child walks away from like fifth, sixth grade and still doesn't know that Carter G. Woodson was the person who started, Negro History Week or Black History Week, then that's a problem. If your child says, "Oh, Martin Luther King," nah, bruh. That's how
well,
you check it.
everything started with Martin Luther King, right? Like everything. I think he invented the peanut, didn't he? That's what I got from some. I got that from some really high quality curriculum. Martin Luther King invented the peanut and turned it into a record player.
And then Jimi Hendrix was born.
Jimi Hendrix was born. I don't know if I probably never told you the story. Maybe I did, about the time in when my kid was in, I want to say preschool. I came to pick him up, and it was near Thanksgiving time, and they had him dressed as a pilgrim. And I just remember, like, it was a jarring experience in a way, because I was like, I don't know what, yeah, huh? I just, like, I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't want to be too crazy because my kid still has to go to school here. So I don't want to be that parent, who all of a sudden gets backlash on his kid because, I don't freaked out. But I was like, you looked at my child and you didn't think about how you were casting these things, like, casting my child as a pilgrim didn't make sense. But I'll tell you one even worse. Let me give you one that's even worse. So, and I wanted to go back and look at this, um, um, because it's a story I've told before with Sharif, but I don't think I've ever told it here on Freedom Friday or with you. So a few years ago, it's been, I'm sure, like quite a few years ago now that I think about it, there was a controversy in the Minneapolis public schools. Yeah, this was many years ago. This is like 2015. My friend Beth Hawkins wrote about it in MinnPost, and I was in a group at the time called Black Advocates for Education, or Bay. Bay was our thing. And it came to our attention that in Minneapolis public schools, they had a social studies program that was bought from, I think, PBS. And the game was called Flight to Freedom. Mission US 2, Flight to Freedom. And what this game did, it was a computer game for Black History Month, used to celebrate Black History Month. And here's a little bit of what Beth wrote. In the game, players assume the role of Lucy King, a 14-year-old who's enslaved, and in 1848 attempts to run away from the Kentucky plantation where she is enslaved, and make her way north. Throughout the game, Lucy is confronted by choices, many of a do what I say or I will whip you sort of choices, right? She encounters white people, and the game is really to navigate white people, and you get badges and coins if you give the right answers to certain things. Some choices earn badges. Some are met with violence, humiliation, and cruelty. When Lucy stays silent in the face of accusatory questions from Mr. Otis, the overseer, he tells her he likes quiet Negroes. Later, Lucy, described as a negress, is auctioned off for $800, right? So this is a game. This is a Black history game that virtualizes slavery and puts you in the role of this young girl who's enslaved, and your goal is to get out of the South to the North, and the way to do it is to answer questions of white folks in the right way, right? And you earn from being, And it turns out the way this came to our attention was there was a Black girl who didn't want to play this game. And she told her mom about, like, I don't want to play this game where I'm a slave and then, I'm looking around at the rest of the class and nobody else is having the same experience I'm having because I'm black. I'm like looking at this, this game. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what that was. A social studies teacher, by the way, at the school, and it was a Montessori school, and and it was a Montessori magnet school. So they're all about being up to date on integration or whatnot. Does a story like that make your head spin?
Yeah, I mean, it does, but it's not surprising whatsoever. It sounds like that Magical Negro movie a little bit. But like
That's right.
like the same premise almost.
Yeah, yeah.
But when we're talking about that type of thing, it just shows even just the teachers' lack of understanding when it comes to these type of issues. When you're talking about race, when you're talking about the society, when you talk about all these type of things, and that's why teacher preparation programs, which we talked about previously, are so important. But also, if the teacher doesn't know anything, you need to have a much more comprehensive piece for them to gain access to and then put in. So even if they don't know anything, at least the students will get quality stuff in front of them. And the fact that that's happening shows that, number one, who vetted that, who co-signed that, and then how did that even make it through?
And you know
MPS
what?
too. It's crazy.
You've worked with the district here a little bit. We had at the time a curriculum and instruction department that was supposed to help teachers, and it did actually. I knew a person in that department, but that department was new. They had never vetted it centralized before. They had to create a staff to be able to say, teachers, we're your resource. Like if you're missing something or whatever, come to us. We will have vetted the things that we give you. I want to go to this article. It's just a little bit of context for this discussion, background information. There's an article in Psychology Today about curriculum and the power of high quality curriculum. And it says, when surveyed on the heels of the pandemic, only half of all teachers report their curricula to be high quality and well aligned to learning standards. This decreases for teachers in schools reporting a majority of low income students, 44%, students of color, 41%, and English learners, 33%. A key observation from this survey study was that teachers want changes in content, curricula, grading, and assessments to provide an excellent education during the pandemic and in the future. Post-pandemic, the need for adaptable content became evident as a sudden transition to online teaching could happen again in the future. So you need to prepare. Last time we were not ready for it at all. We didn't have the right tools and curriculum. 45% of educators continued using their pre-existing curriculum after the pandemic. And in contrast, 27% opted for a different one, but that was either self-made or sourced from peers, like you just mentioned, teachers pay teachers. A mere 4 to 23% were provided with a new curriculum by their respective educational institutions, like their school. So the overwhelming minority, it's almost as if the school districts and your employers as an educator are abdicating their their duty to make sure that what's in the classroom is quality, and that you don't have teachers out there making silly decisions like like the Flight to Freedom curriculum, which we just talked about, which, though, by the way, if you were a social studies teacher and you use that, you could be slightly forgiven for the fact that it came from PBS. So in your mind, you're thinking PBS, public, broadcasting system, working with educators. You're thinking that got vetted, right? And meanwhile, you're making little black girls virtualize slavery in the classroom. What do you think districts should do better? What do you think that superintendents and principals and others should do better to make sure that there's some quality control for curricula and curriculum?
Well, number one, I would say that, a focus on pedagogy is needed, right? So, like, you can have the most pristine, like, backward and forward curriculum ever. And if you don't have quality teachers who know how to actually deliver that content, it doesn't mean anything. So I would say, folks need to focus on developing teachers' pedagogical skills. And that is being able to have student engagement, being aware of various protocols for how to deliver the content effectively, right? Not just reading off a paper, not just clicking through PowerPoints. Like I don't know how much you hate that, but I hate that.
I
As
hate PowerPoint.
I hate
PowerPoint was
professional
invented by
development.
the devil. Yeah,
It
PowerPoint
really
was
is,
literally, yeah, no. Hmm.
and students feel the same way. So it's like, okay. And so I think that that's number one. Like you need to just like have teachers focus on developing those skills. But number two, you need to have them be able to have several ways to access several different frames of the curriculum. And I'm speaking specifically of social studies and history, right? Because for me, those are the most neglected and the most important type of content and subject areas, even though I'm kind of biased, right? And when you have that high quality curriculum, like what does that look like? Are you just like if a student walks away and just knows like the three, folks who wrote the Federalist Papers, right? Like what is the focus of that curriculum? So it could be high quality, but the quality is based in what? Right. And I think sometimes like that nuance is also lost in the sauce. It's like, what content are you actually going over? What's the story or the narrative, especially like I said, when it comes to history and social studies that you want students to kind of glean from overall. So if you just have like the 1776 curriculum nonsense, right? That is a form of indoctrination that's going down because you're not allowing the students to have the critical skills or the critical analysis skills to question what they're literally being taught. And even I used to always say that to my students. I'm like, you know what brainwashing is, right? That's the same word for meaning indoctrination, that you're not given the tools necessary to question what I'm telling you right now. So what am I telling you? How do you know that's real? How do you know that I'm not lying to you? What are the skills that you are learning that allows you to question what is even being told to you, right? And those type of skills are something that should be emphasized, especially on, when you get to middle school, when you get into high school. But in most places, even in social studies, it's not taught really in elementary school. Many people don't even have the background knowledge to effectively approach what is even in front of them, even if they're given a curriculum, right? And then they don't have the pedagogical skills to actually deliver the content. So like I would say all those type of things need to be addressed, but addressed in a systematic way. So I can speak to you right now that, we're emphasizing, 5 guiding instructional principles when teaching social studies that goes through the whole K through 12. Like when I come to your classroom, I want to see collaborative learning communities, right? I want to see critical literacies. What are you exposing the children to, right? I want to see dialectical thinking. So if the children start to go down a certain path, are you questioning why they believe that to be true, right? And you can approach this in different types of ways. I want to see inclusive and equitable practices within your classroom. How many voices are you including, right? And also community transformation. Are the children involved in real authentic performance tasks that can be used in the real world that demonstrates real skills from the content that's being taught? So like if you're doing that, then we can start talking about how those curriculum pieces can fit within those pedagogical strategies on how you format and how you structure your class. And that is, I think, the secret sauce that I know as an educator myself that I learned through my own practice over time. Nobody ever sat me down and put it in those terms to me. But like that's what I've learned through that process. And I think especially when we're talking about, low income or racially isolated school districts, when we're talking about Black and brown children, which happens way too much, right? You do have a situation where folks have more leniency to basically do whatever they want, or they get the complete opposite where they're like, this is what you do. You read from this script. You don't deviate from this script, which also then takes away agency and ownership of the educator and ultimately the students, which I would argue devalues the educational process in a different type of way, but just as sinister.
As every time you talk, I like feel there's a different level of complexity that we don't know about as people who are not in schools. And I'm thinking about what you just said. If I'm a principal and I've got multiple teachers and they are at different levels of their understanding and their journey, deciding who gets more agency or who gets less agency feels like that would be a little bit of a problem, right? Like if you have how many teachers usually in a building? Like if I was a principal in Philly, how many teachers I got in like a elementary school maybe or a middle school, let's just say. How many
Well,
teachers probably?
it matters how big that middle school is. And we only got about like a handful of middle schools left because a lot of them were changed to K through 8s. but you can have anywhere from like 24 to like 60 teachers within that building.
Well, wait a second. So you just said K-8. So you definitely have a lot of teachers in a K-8 building, right? So
Yeah.
if you're a principal of a K-8 building, you probably got what, 30 or more? Or
More, yeah,
yeah, more
definitely
than
more.
30.
Yeah.
And it's
Some
you.
less though. It matters, like I said, it matters the size of the building, matters how many students attend, all that stuff.
That feels like a big job though to know. So the thing that triggered me to say that is the agency part. Like, how do you know? Like, is teacher one, is she ready or is he ready for more agency or less or whatnot? Do you need, how do you know? Like, that feels like too much work. I don't want to do all that.
I mean, unfortunately, that's what also happens a lot, right? Where
Yeah.
folks are extremely problematic, and instead of being evaluated appropriately, they're just pushed through to the point where, oh, you want to fire this person? You didn't go through these steps. You didn't, there's no documentation for the years that would lead up for us to even consider that at this point. And so, but you also got the opposite end of things where there's principles that if you don't fit within their mold of what they think it should be, and sometimes which is problematic because people are people, you have the opposite where certain teachers are being targeted as retribution because they don't go along and drink the Kool-Aid and they question what is being taught. So I think I've seen effective leadership at schools switch over a whole school in 1 year. And I used to think that was nonsense. When I was in the classroom as a teacher, I'm like, whatever, the next administrator going to come through here. I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to be here longer than them, that type of mentality. And a lot of teachers have that mentality. But then I've also seen administrators come in and flip over a whole school and make it more positive, the culture more positive, and even the feeling of the students and the teachers within the building in a much more humanizing way. And I think that's what we also lose sight of, the importance of being humanizing elements within these schools. And emphasizing that and the messiness of education. Like you're saying right there, it's messy as hell, man. Like there is no cookie cutter way that you can say, this is how you do it. Now you can give tips and be like, this is how you can do it better. Here's some things that's worked for me. You know what I mean? But different communities, different children, different circumstances, right? Different resources. All those things come into a factor when a leader is trying to decide who do I trust, who can I co-sign, you know what I mean? Because you don't want a leader who co-signs because they're in the same sorority with, the sorority sister. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's a
Yeah.
problematic measure of why you allow that teacher to get away with what they're getting away with. But you do want a leader who recognizes, oh, they're a veteran teacher, the students respect them, the other teachers respect them as a leader. That's the type of person that you want to put in a position to actually be able to coach other folks, but also be able to have some of that academic freedom where you're not just watching them like a hawk, because you need to worry about this person who just came out of school who is somewhat problematic. And all of those factors are going in people's heads.
So I think, the tension here is that like scripting curriculum and being very prescriptive about what teachers and pacing, making sure that they're in the same place in the same curriculum, all of that feels heavy-handed to some educators. But I get the theory behind it. I get the sense of, you might have teacher A who at Thanksgiving break has only gotten through 20% of what he was supposed to get through, and teacher B has gotten through 60%. And you have to ask yourself why. It's Thanksgiving. These are both two teachers. They both have kids in their control, but the kids in this group made it to a further point in the curriculum or in the lessons than the other did. So then that becomes an argument for, okay, first of all, we got to keep them paced. Like we got to let them know by Christmas, this is supposed to happen. By Valentine's Day, that's supposed to happen. I'm making up dates, but by these points in time, you should be at X, like in terms, so that creates pacing, and teachers don't love pacing. They're like, well, you're not in my classroom. You don't know, like we're at where we're at because that's just the way it is with the kids I got this year. Last year, we were at a different point at Thanksgiving. This year, I've got a different set of kids, and you don't know who those are. I might have this year, I got 8 special ed students who require more of my attention than last year when I had 3, or something like that. I'm making stuff up, but
No,
um,
you're not making stuff up. That those things happen, bro.
it's kind of like, you see both sides. You see, okay, I see the side of teachers need to be professionals, and they don't need somebody looking over their shoulder constantly. And if your teachers do require you to look over their shoulder constantly, and you have to do that, you may have done a bad job of hiring, right? Like you might not, because your teachers should not need you to be doing that, or at least that should be the goal. The goal should be that they eventually fly and be free, and they can just manage on their own. But what you just said, scripting, teachers don't love scripting. Thou shalt cover this way, and pacing. Thou shalt get this done by very specific days and dates. You should be on page 293 of this book by whatever date. Yeah, but I see both sides ish, like both sides of that.
Me too. And I think that's
It's
where
complex.
that's where the humanizing piece comes in, right? Recognizing like this is not there's a science to it, right? But there's also a kind of like mushiness that exists, that is not necessarily prescriptive or not just the same thing, right? And that should be treated in a way that is humanizing to the teacher, for the students, because even in a situation, there are some teachers that love the scripts. They don't like, just give me the script. I'm going to come in, do my job, go home, check off these boxes, keep it moving. I would argue that's not necessarily a good thing, but that's just my biased opinion. Some people need that.
When
But
you
at
say
the same,
humanizing, though, what's that look like? What does humanizing look like?
like not making folks feel like they need to rush through things to the point where they neglect certain things, right? Or put pressure to them where they're like waking up in the middle of the night, concerned that they're not on the exact page that they're going to need to be on at a certain point. Now, I love the fact that you said by winter break, you should be at this point. No, usually pacing's like this week, this objective, this standard needs to be adjusted at this point right now. When I walk into your classroom, it needs to be reflected on your lesson plan. Now, number one, that also creates people who fraud lesson plans. And a lot of, that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of people don't recognize how much teaching is like a human endeavor. You're going to have different types of folks and all types of stripes. And let's be honest, teaching right now, we don't even got enough folks to be in the classroom, let alone expect them to be highly skilled and highly trained enough to actually approach and be effective, especially in the schools and the school districts that need those teachers the most, the highly skilled and the highly trained, right? In those places, we don't even get the pick of the crop. You know what I mean? Like we don't pay them enough in comparative in school districts that do kind of have more money and more resources. And the schools that have less resources and less money, right, or have to stretch out money, you're going to have a situation where you're going to have a lot of problematic situations, which means that you need effective leadership in those school buildings. But you also need effective leadership from school district administration that actually has a vision about what they want to see in the classrooms overall, but emphasizing a humanizing element when it comes to how do you train these teachers? How do you coach these folks? How do you work with them to have them understand most effective practices and strategies when dealing with teaching? Because it is, there's a reason why teachers self-medicate like crazy, man. But, like, I don't know if you've ever been to a happy hour, but those loud people in the corner, those people usually are teachers.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, but that's the truth.
Well, what you just said makes me think that we need a much bigger investment in teacher support, though. So, like, teachers are on their own a lot right now. And then you said, well, the school leader, somebody should be kicking in. Even that is insufficient in terms of individual teachers need individual supports for their individual needs in their specific classrooms. And we unfortunately don't seem to have a layer of professional help, like that's diagnostic, that feels like, okay, you're going to need some help with this, and this. And we've got a person for you. We've got a curriculum person for you. We've got an assessment person for you, because that seems to be the issue that you're working with. We've got a I mean, I hate to say it because this might not be true, but like we have a disciplined person or person that's like classroom management, not a disciplined person as in a dean, a disciplined person as in this is what research tells us how we should handle the issue that you have right now, right? Like like
Well,
we
I mean,
need a
you
whole
could.
nother layer of professionals, don't we? We need another layer of people.
Well, I mean, then you start talking about districts becoming too top heavy, right? Because like sometimes you end up with a bunch of folks who just don't want to be in the classroom anymore. Not
Yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
that they were effective pedagogues themselves, or if they were even effective in their own classroom management. Um, and I think we also need to speak about adult education. A lot of
Hmm.
folks don't
Hmm.
approach professional developments for educators in a way that looks through the lens of these how what's the best practices for adult education, not
Hmm.
just the best
Hmm.
practices I want them to know about, but how am I approaching these teachers in a way which will be effective, because we
And
already
teachers
talked
hate
about it, man.
AD.
Yeah,
Teachers
it's a
hate
PowerPoint.
they hate it, and I've heard it for years. It's the one thing I've heard that's a universal criticism. Educators do not like their PD, and the PD is low quality. So, getting back to curriculum, you did mention the 1776 thing earlier, and that reminds me that we've had this national kind of battle between the 1619 project, and then what later came out of that was Hillsdale College. Trump and other people assembling people that are, supposedly scholars to create a very patriotic, different view through this 1776 curriculum. It's funny. Sometimes people accuse you of what they're doing. So they want to call one thing indoctrination, but then they come back with this happy ass American curriculum that is, telling kids that, slavery was kind of bad, but, everybody was doing slavery. Like American exceptionalism, all that stuff sounds bad. And yeah, maybe we should talk about that. But it's not that bad because we were so great. Like we were so great in other ways, which is a great way of saying, like, listen, we didn't experience what those other people were experiencing, so it doesn't matter very much. Right. Like we weren't enslaved. We were like writing constitutions and powdering our wigs and I don't know, like grooming, 14-year-old girls to have our mixed babies, whatever it was that they were doing back then. Right. So I bet you that's not in the 1776 curriculum. But, I just do want to say, well, first of all, just I'll ask you because both of those are like social study ish and history ish type of curriculums, and they couldn't be more different. 1776, 1619 project came out. I savaged that particular curriculum. Number one, I didn't think that a major newspaper in the United States should be creating a curriculum that teachers just pulled off of the web and took in their classroom without any understanding of how you adopt a curriculum. Like just the, oh my God, I love Nicole Hannah Jones and blah blah blah. So I pulled this off last night is the same thing as going to Pinterest or something else like that, especially if you don't understand it. You don't understand the context, but you're feeling super empowered because this Black woman created this that you love. So you feel like it's the ultimate license. Like not, now I know what I need to know. No, you don't. No, you don't. Slow down. Slow down. I savaged it, but I will say this much for the record and always being publicly transparent. Yesterday, I sent a message to Nicole Hannah Jones apologizing to her, of which I don't know if she'll ever see it, but it just needed to put it on the record, saying to her basically, I am having a life changing event. I'm having a rebooting of my values. I am rethinking much of what I have believed in the world. And I came at you and came at your work in a way in the past that was unwarranted and out of pocket. And for that, I apologize. And that's that. Like, as adults, we take responsibility for when you do wrong and you think you were wrong, then you must say that you were wrong and you must make some form of amends. And I did that with her because I did savage that curriculum. Some of what I didn't like about that curriculum still stands in my mind, which is um, uh, first of all, the adoption, how teachers got it. They pulled it off of, the New York Times website and took it into classrooms without a lot happening in between those two things. There should have been some other work, like maybe a principal pulls it down and they meet a teacher group and they discuss it and they discuss how it's going to work with their students, but not the individual teacher who may or may not be in a great place in her own journey or his own journey. I just needed something else because, as a school board member, we used to do curriculum adoptions in a very formal process where we got to ask questions about how are you going to use this? Where does it come from? Is it going to be good for all of our kids? That sort of thing. So, but then when 1776 came out, I was like, well, 1619 ain't that bad. Like my problems with 1619 project are little nitpicky things, but this 1776 curriculum is my first alarm bells of, oh, you really are trying to program our children to be ignorant about the country that they live in and ignorant about themselves. And you as a social studies teacher, this is a long-winded question, but you as a social studies teacher, how do you draw the line between what's indoctrination and what's just education?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I would say, number one, our children, us, most people in this society are indoctrinated with anti-blackness from a very young age, right? And that's implied in curriculums. That's what's emphasized, what's not, de-emphasized and everything. So we need to just get that off the jump, right? We're being indoctrinated from a young age that, blackness is not good. Number two, I would say that you have to question and have the students learn how to question what they're being taught, right? Just because it comes from authority or an authority figure does not mean that it's correct or it's a right analysis or it reflects your own positionality and context in how you approach it. And having those type of nuances and then emphasizing that. So it becomes less of a question of what specific things you're going through, right? And more of a question about what skills the students are learning to how to approach that content or how to approach one content show, because they can have a really good teacher that shows them a bunch of stuff, but taught them about freaking Greek mythology. So the child can walk away with like a huge understanding about the Greek gods and all that, but have no real analysis about how to question what they're being taught and why did you spend so much time on Greek mythology. And these are the type of questions that, number one, educators need to wrestle with, and they need to be able to articulate why they're focused on what they're focused on at a certain time. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, there's no such, especially when it comes to history and social studies, there is no such thing as objectivity. Now, you can approach subjects in objective ways as much as possible and limit bias as much as possible, but bias will always be there. There's not enough time in a school year to go over everything. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And
so
number one, you don't know
choices.
everything.
You're always making choices. Yeah.
And when you're making those choices, you got to be very clear and reflect on your own kind of professional practice as you go through those motions. I think sometimes we skip this reflective piece. We skip the whole idea of like, I don't know everything. That I'm not simply the authority, that this is a learning process for me as I go through this process, right, of teaching and learning and that cycle, right? Because you should be also learning from your students, because your students aren't coming in as empty vessels. They're coming in with kind of being exposed to the world, especially nowadays. I was on the sub the other day and I saw these 2 7-year-old kids just scrolling through the reels. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what are they being exposed to about the world looking at those reels? So I think it's more of a question of like the professionalism in the sense of pedagogy, how you approach the content as a professional, but also being willing to allow kind of that vulnerability of recognizing that you don't know everything. And that's okay. And your students will know things that you don't know about. So how are you going to create the circumstances for those conversations to happen in an authentic way where you're not simply just spouting your worldview for the students to reach the same conclusion? And that's one thing I always emphasize, even at the beginning of the school year. I'm like, you can disagree with me. I want you to disagree with me. We're not going to reach the same conclusions at times. And that's fine. But we need to learn to be able to speak to one another about these things, read the world and read this word together so we get a clearer understanding about what the situation is, even though we might not come to the same conclusions about how to address it or what it means ultimately to your life and who you are as a person.
And it feels to me like your geography is going to make a difference in all of this. So if I'm like in an urban school district, if I'm in a rural school district, if I'm in a suburban district, it feels like the context of what we have to teach or how we teach is going to be different because you're going to make different choices based upon what's the cultural makeup of your district. I think that's going to become more of a problem when we start having more mixed classrooms, right? We're going to, the suburbs, for instance, are way different than they were like 15, 20, 30 years ago, right? Like the
Yes, they
suburbs
are.
are browning. So now you're going to have a school where you have 60 to 70% white kids going down to being more like 50 or 40. And that's going to need you to make some different decisions. Here's something I want to ask you about because you'll have a good frame for this. The 1619 project is based in the idea that you have to have critical inquiry of the stuff that you're being told by your country. So you have to look at, you're being told X, but you need to have some critical thinking, some critical thought behind, and challenge and question the things that you are learning. The conservatives called that indoctrination because they're fearful that you are trying to tell people that we're just a racist, like the founding of America was racist. The thing that they hated the most about Nicole Hannah-Jones, what she said was that at the time that the United States was started, the founding ideals were not true. They were actually lies at that point. And, all these high-minded, all men are created equal and all of that. And that was the thing that they the most didn't want taught. They wanted taught we were great from the beginning. We had some flaws that we corrected along the way, but American exceptionalism. So they called her work indoctrination because it was starting from a point they didn't want to start from, and they didn't want their kids being taught that. I'm the flip of them in that their response was 1776, which Donald Trump had called for. He had called for patriotic education as a contrast to the Nicole Hannah-Jones stuff. The patriotic means love of one's country, zealously and unselfishly devoted to the service of one's country. And I would add a piece to that definition: uncritically, zealously devoted to your country, meaning your country can wrap the flag in anything and tell you it is great. It can wrap a turd in the flag and tell you that it's chocolate, and you will have to like live with that, right?
Yeah.
That is not learning. That is not education. That is straight up nationalist indoctrination. So the marketing for 1776 is we're not telling kids what to think like 1619 Project does. We're not calling the country racist like they do. We're just providing primary documents and reading primary documents with kids so that they can make up their own minds. But to what you just said, Ish, which primary documents are you choosing? And why are you choosing those? Right? Like, I could pull together a whole bunch of primary documents that make my case, and I can leave out some documents that make your case, right? How do you think, like, this is a long question too, but how do you think that we think about asserting ourselves to say no? What you are proposing actually is indoctrination, and what we are proposing is what education is supposed to be, which is critical thinking, critical thought about the country that we live in. We're not supposed to have blind kind of devotion to our country. And the reason I'm asking about how do you think we assert ourselves is because we're going to start having more mixed schools. We're going to have this fight. Like right now, we got a bunch of white districts and we got a bunch of not white districts. So it's a little easier to not have these fights. That's going to become harder, like soon.
I mean, we're seeing that right now, right? The majority, I think right now we're at that tipping point where the majority of students in public schools are non-white.
Yeah, I think we crossed it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we crossed it.
And white people need this education too, right? They need to question. And it's not necessarily to say, you need to feel guilty as a white person, like how these folks frame it. But it's like, you need to be honest as a human being. Owning other people is not good. I mean, like, and you could judge the level of not goodness, right, of what that means. But objectively, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, also had children with his dead wife's half sister, who was his slave. You know what I mean? And some of them children,
and who was a child,
who was a child.
He was a child. Yeah.
So when you look at it, and I really hate when people are like, well, you're putting presentism on the history. No, objectively, having relations with your 13-year-old enslaved girl is wrong. Like, how can you even like pretend that that was just a slip in judgment. And then all you got
Well,
to
and
do is read the one thing he wrote for a book, which basically argued that black people were inherently inferior in every way.
Notes
You can miss me
Notes
with
on
all that.
Virginia, for people listening, the Notes on Virginia by Thomas Jefferson. Go read it and get to the part where he talks about black people and the differences between blacks and whites, and how he thought, a lot of people on the Constitution, they say it was written in a way that it could be flexible over time so that you eventually would have your rights. No, Thomas Jefferson basically said there was never going to be a time in which we were going to ever be able to live together, even after being free. He did foresee a time where black people and African centered people would be free. But what he said was that they would never be able to live in the same country. We'd not be able to share a country together. We would have to think about like Liberia or some other solution for black folks. And just to on a data point of what we just talked about, the percentage of public school students between 2010 and 2021 decreased from 52% white to 45%, which means that now the majority of public school students are non-white. And I honestly believe, someone else can check me on this data point, I actually believe the majority are poor, or actually qualify for free and reduced lunch or something. There's some measurement of where it tipped, where our schools are way less middle class than they used to be. So that means that there's going to be a new imperative on what we have to teach kids and how we teach them, right? We got to just, our student body is changing. I know we're coming to time here. One of the last things I wanted to ask about this, the there's curriculum, there's high quality curriculum, then there's the social studies element that we just talked about. Then there's the freedom and the agency you want teachers to have, but not too much, right? Like, because there's a point in which teachers do wacky things. We just mentioned it. They buy lessons online that actually, what you said at the beginning of the show, are crap, right? Like they're not good, and we need some form of quality control. But I think I'm going to stick with my idea-ish. I feel like the thing that we should be advocating for, a lot of times we're advocating out of negativity. We're, the way things, what's wrong. But we need some positive advocacy. And my thing is, I do think we need another layer of people, maybe not centralized at the district level. Maybe people who spend all their times in schools, maybe, people that are certified and trained in a way to provide a variety of support services to teachers so that they're not doing it all on their own, right? Like, I actually think it's unfair to think that a teacher has all this out of classroom time to be rethinking the world, like, of education and all that stuff. No, they've got children too. They have families, they go home, they have other stuff going on in their life. And, we expect them to be not just in the classroom, but figuring out hundreds of years of theory and curriculum and all this type of stuff outside of class. Why don't we have more people? Like, just why don't we just add more people? So you tell me whether you think that's a good, positive point of advocacy.
I think it is. I think the folks, like I said before, that do it need to be quality teachers, right? You should not just have someone who just wanted to get out the classroom after 2 years, 3 years, just because they can talk a slick game and have the right relationships, right? You need to have some type of quality control on the folks who do that. Also, a lot of times, I think one of the best models I've seen is when those folks are still teaching. So not only are they doing it, but they're released enough to support other teachers while also still being able to practice their own craft, right? And then providing them with effective professional development, but not in a way where you have a bunch of people just like, this is what how you a student engage, right? But you're not engaged. And see, these are the things that we need to be modeling through the process, but then also should be modeled in the classroom, and it also should be discussed professionally. So teachers also need that space. We know what works, right? Some of the best schools in this country are private schools, and even around the world, teachers have more prep time, have more time to actually plan and think through and talk with other folks about what's going on in the classroom in a truly reflective way. So I don't even know what the issue is half the time, besides this kind of like model of like rush, checkbox, checkbox. Don't even pay attention to what's happening around you. Just get it done. And I think that is not an effective strategy. And I just want to put a little tidbit on what you were just saying. As the students are becoming more not white, that's why I would argue we're seeing a much more crackdown on teaching in a sense of more control over what is taught.
That's a good
They're
point.
afraid that folks are going to be questioning. I mean, there's a whole line of thinking with white supremacists, right? That think that, oh, well, these folks hate America anyway. They don't know what civilization actually means. Like, I just saw Ann Coulter being interviewed by Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever his name is. And she's like, yeah, I agreed with everything you said, but I would never vote for you because you're Indian. That you don't represent.
Did you see what his response to that was? His response
was, yes, he's a bootlicker.
Yes, his response was, well, I respect you for saying that, at least for being honest about it. You know, when he was running in Iowa, and this is kind of an aside, he's the only candidate that went to every county in Iowa when they were campaigning. He hit every county. He hit more than everybody else, and he came out on bottom. And his wife was interviewing two Republican voters to say, just tell me the truth. Like, what are you hearing about my husband or whatever, and why people wouldn't vote for him? And the couple literally said to her, well, I mean, I hate to say it, but like Ann, they agree with everything that he says, but they think he's too brown and he's Muslim. Literally said those words, too brown and that he's Muslim. First of all, he's Hindu and he is very brown. But I just thought there was rich irony to that, because here's a guy who has made his whole life on being more American than thou. He's only been in America for 5 minutes. And all of a sudden he knows all of Black history and he can argue with us about our own history, right? Like a lot of people who've been here 5 minutes do. They get in the country, they're here for 5 minutes and they go, oh, I'm Dinesh D'Souza. I'm going to tell you why what you think about your own history is wrong and why America is great. It is the greatest place on earth. Well, you think it's great because you came from a country where there was a caste system and your parents were kind of high up in the caste system, and you got here because your parents were both professionals high up in the caste system. So you brought that elitism with you here and you just transformed it into American elitism, where you think now you have been fully enfranchised into the American franchise without having to pay anything in, by the way. Like we're invested. We have 400 years of investment that we never got paid for. Compounding interest on that would make that trillions of dollars that we have in an unpaid bill. But you being here for 5 minutes, you didn't pay 5 cents. You didn't pay anything to buy into the house. Like, you came into a casino and started winning right away with no chips, right? So and I know I'm going off on an aside, but this is the pick me problem. He couldn't say, and you just said you wouldn't vote for me because I'm racist. I mean, because you're racist. Like, you just said you wouldn't vote for me because I'm Indian, but you agree with me on everything else. He couldn't say that because he's a pick me, right? And America has a pick me problem. We have a really bad pick me problem. It's like an outbreak right now. It's like herpes. It's like crazy. Like we got to get rid of the pick me problem. I'm only saying all this. I know it's an aside. I just don't want to raise any more kids that grow up to be that. I want to raise kids that grow up to be proud of themselves, where they come from, and to be able to call a thing a thing. I know we're supposed to be trained to not call things racism and not always go there and don't play the race card. That's all slave conditioning. You're supposed to call things exactly what they are. You're supposed to be Dick Gregory. You're not supposed to be Vivek. Anyways, that's my long tirade. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, just to veggie back off of that real quick. You have a situation where people's talking about racism, but sound like two 10-year-olds talking about the merit of capitalism. They don't know what the hell they're talking about because it's not literally being talked about. It's not being taught. It's not being like explicitly addressed in a way in school buildings, in curriculums, right? And so like when you get to it, there's a lot of camouflages and mirages as a result. And as a result, you get folks like that bootlicker, right? You get folks who co-sign these ideas and actually double down on the most problematic aspects of this society. When you talk about who really fought for freedom in this society, you're talking about Black people. And they just didn't fight for freedom for Black people. They fought for freedom for everybody. And it's consistent to the point where even Black people nowadays are looking around and be like, yeah, our ancestors did all this, but we're still getting the short end of the stick from these folks who benefit from what we were able to make possible for them to begin with. And so like when you're talking about that, like white children need to know that. The Latino child that comes in and is asked what race they is, they need to understand why they're asked what race they are. They need to understand the circumstances that led their family to migrate to America based on America's foreign policy in their country. Right. And if those things are not being taught, if those things aren't discussed, if we just have this thing, well, they just need to learn how to be an American, they're literally talking about they just need to learn to think like white supremacists. They need to really learn how to think and be like these folks who are really destroying the whole world right now and are unsustainable. I mean, I can go on and on about the ridiculousness of like not being able to teach the truth to our children. And when I say truth, the truth is that our children are not asked to think for themselves. So everything you just went down, that's called critical thinking. That's looking at multiple things and pointing out several points of evidence to prove the point that you were trying to make. Our student, too many children are not taught that.
Well, and we're going to have a fight because because what you just said is really true. With the decreasing number of white students, they're going to become more desperate to make sure that the remaining white students aren't so-called indoctrinated. What that really means to them is they don't want their kids coming home having flipped over to the truthful side. They don't want to like have Thanksgiving conversations where they got a kid at the table saying like, what we did was foul. It was messed up, blah, blah. No, they need to keep all their kids like in the cult, like in the white cult, the cult of whiteness. They've got to keep them in that. And by the way to do that is to start legislating now to make it illegal to teach those kids the things that they don't want them taught. And we really think it's a lot about us, but we're just kind of like the collateral damage. It's really about the white kids. They don't want their white kids flipping. They don't want their white, what they're calling woke right now and the woke mind virus and all that is their deepest insecurities coming true, which is that their kids will learn the truth about the world and they have to outlaw it right now before it happens, or else you're going to have probably no white people at some point. This is their fear. At some point, they're just going to meld into the whole rest of other groups and we will be annihilated, we'll be gone. And I just want to say this on a point that we just mentioned. I said trillions of dollars. The estimate on what America owes Black people for years of unpaid labor and the cost of slavery and all of the real material investments that created is between $5 and $24 trillion in wages, compensation, potential interest since the days of slavery and the institution became legal in British America in the 1660s. So $5 to $24 trillion. So we have people coming to America who, as I said, are here 5 minutes when part of the induction process is to train them to be anti-Black and to have anti-Blackness in the head because they don't want this bill paid. That is the reason why they do that. The reason they want to do that is, listen, you're a little brown, but if you've been here for 5 minutes, we can make you probationary white. But to do that, you need to be able to look at this other group of people with scorn and say to them, so this is Vivek on CNN arguing with Don Lemon about how Black people should think about America. And Don Lemon says, with all due respect, I don't think that you should be lecturing me, a Black man in America, about how I should view my own history and interaction with this country. And Vivek's response was, as it always is, super arrogant, super smug, super like, listen, I went to school with white kids and I'm kind of basically just white until I run for president and people tell me that I'm not. But, his response was, well, I disagree, Don. I think that we should all, it doesn't matter our color, it doesn't matter our background, we should all be able to engage in these thoughts and blah, 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 blah. And then he runs for president and someone tells him straight up to his face, yeah, you're too brown and you're Indian and I'm racist and you won't get my vote, even though I agree with everything you say. That's such rich irony, but we can't let him, anybody else like him, or the educators on the other side of this forget this debt. That is the goal. The goal is to wipe away that debt. They want to be a deadbeat country. They want to owe this. Like the founding fathers. Okay, first of all, those aren't my fathers. But if they were founding fathers, they are deadbeat dads. They never paid their child support, right? Like, and their child support now is $5 to $24 trillion. This is a stick up, hands up.
Yeah. And you got to also keep in mind, most of the people who do call themselves white or became white, like, and immigrated to this country after the end of slavery, benefited materially from the conditions that slave labor created for them to benefit from. Not just here, but also in Latin America, also in the Caribbean. There's many examples of where this exists. And that even speaks to the centrality where we need to really get to an honest conversation about African diaspora, Black history and everything. Because like when you start venturing off, well, what about this and what about this? and they don't understand this, you're already working from a deficit point, especially when we're talking about a large amount of non-white immigrants coming to this country and adopting those anti-Black views, and then not understanding the real history of what the circumstances that they find themselves in, and then co-signing some nonsense, and then recognize, or should be recognizing, that these folks don't like you because of your race.
And God, this is such a see, we always do this at the end of
I
conversations. This
know.
is so crazy and so rich about it. This is where the individualism thing comes from. And as a person who has walked away from the libertarian way of thinking and has had my values change, that is very individualistic. The individual is everything, atomistic, kind of selfish and self-interested politics of the world. And the benefit of that is to stop a class action lawsuit, a class action to get that 24 trillion. So no, you find Black conservatives, Candace Owens and others, who say, I'm an independent thinker. I think for myself. I am not with the team. I am off the plantation, blah, blah. And what they're really saying is, I have been separated from my people on purpose as an individual so that we can't have a class action lawsuit to get what we want and what we need as a group, as a class, right? And we are a class, whether we like it or not, because we have been put into a class, right? And we do have a class action lawsuit. So to be able to make us the individualistic thinking people or whatever is a good strategy at diluting our claim, like diluting, what we owe. And I just want to say, because you touched on this, if you were a Irish or Italian or Polish or Jewish, keep going down the list of all these different pre-white ethnicities, you also owe, because when you came to Ellis Island, you were coming into a fully formed country with a fully formed economy that was better than when you came from. This is why they were delousing you at Elliott Island or whatever, Ellis Island, because you were seen as coming from a crap hole country to America that was fully formed. And thank you very much. You now owe too. Right. The whole thing. Well, I wasn't even here for slavery. Yes, that's true. But you bought into the house without paying the price. Right. So you collectively do owe us a debt. And the reason you want to split us off into individuals is so that we have to make individual claims. And this is what corporations do. They actually don't want a class action. They want you to have to fight one by one for each of your little thing. I'll stop at this. You're not telling Jewish people in the Holocaust or Japanese people after internment camps that they should fight one by one individually for their claim. You are seeing them as a class of people. And I think this is where curriculum is going to come full circle, and what we teach and how we teach. There is a movement right now for us not to teach anything that I just said that is absolutely on the record and true. And there is a business reason to not teach that. It is not an education reason. It is not a moral reason. It is a business reason. And I think it's because they saw civil rights and the civil rights movement going too far. And at some point they looked up and they saw a Black president and they're like, damn, this thing really could go the other direction for us. And we don't want that. Anyways, that's all I got to say today. Ish, thank you so much, brother, for this riveting discussion. I know we went to a different place at the end there, but this is the way it always happens. This is why I love these discussions. So
Yeah, man.
this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you're freer now than you were when you started this show with Ish and me. We'll see you at the next episode. Thank you so much.